Next tonight, a plane crash at Southend Airport, about 1 hour east of London. Witnesses reported seeing a terrifying fireball in the sky.
Two airliners collide on Spanish island Tenerife, resulting in the deadliest accident in aviation history.
Yesterday afternoon, an aircraft which had landed here earlier in the day took off bound for the Netherlands. Shortly after takeoff, it got into
In the history of aviation, progress has often come at a painful cost, ranging from technical failures and human error to acts of war and terrorism. Certain tragedies stand out not only for their death tolls, but for the lessons they forced the world to learn. This is a record of aviation's darkest moments throughout history. Sit tight, because each entry tells the story of a flight that never landed and the chain of events that made it so. The Tenerife Airport Disaster. The Tenerife Airport disaster occurred on 27 March 1977 at Los Rodeos Airport, now Tenerife North Airport in the Canary Islands, Spain. It remains the deadliest accident in aviation history. The incident involved two Boeing 747 jumbo jets, KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736. Both flights had been diverted to Tenerife due to a terrorist bombing at Gran Canaria Airport. As a result, Los Rodeos became congested with aircrafts, forcing planes to park on taxiways, complicating ground movement. While taxiing in thick fog, miscommunication between the KLM crew and air traffic control led the KLM aircraft to begin its takeoff roll while the Pan Am aircraft was still taxiing on the same runway. The control tower lacked ground radar, and the visibility was extremely low. The KLM aircraft struck the Pan Am jet at high speed, resulting in a massive explosion. All 248 people aboard the KLM flight died. Of the 396 on the Pan Am flight, only 61 survived. The total death toll was 583. The investigation concluded that the primary cause was pilot error on the part of the KLM captain, who initiated takeoff without explicit clearance. Contributing factors included ambiguous radio communication, crew misunderstanding, and dense fog. The disaster led to major reforms in international aviation, including standardized radio phraseology and the global introduction of crew resource management training for pilots. At number 2, we have the Iran Air Flight 655. Iran Air Flight 655 was a scheduled passenger flight from Tehran, Iran, to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, with a stop in Bandar Abbas. On the 3rd of July 1988, the Airbus A300B-203 operating this route was shot down by the United States Navy guided missile cruiser USS Vincennes over the Persian Gulf. All 290 people on board were killed, including 66 children. The incident occurred in Iranian airspace during the aircraft's regular flight path over the Strait of Hormuz. The Vincennes had entered Iranian territorial waters while pursuing Iranian speedboats after one of its helicopters had come under perceived threat. During this operation, the ship's crew mistook the civilian airliner for an Iranian F-14, a Tomcat fighter jet, a military aircraft used by both the U.S. Navy and the Iranian Air Force. According to U.S. government accounts, the crew believed the aircraft was descending in an attack profile toward the warship, but in reality, Flight 655 was climbing normally and had been identified on civilian air traffic control systems. The Vincennes issued multiple warnings over both military and civilian frequencies, but received no response. The flight crew was tuned to the standard civilian frequency and was not aware of the communications being made on military channels. At 10:24 a.m. local time, the Vincennes fired two SM-2MR surface-to-air missiles, both of which struck the aircraft. It disintegrated mid-air and fell into the sea with no survivors. The international response was one of widespread condemnation, Investigations by the International Civil Aviation Organization concluded that the Vincennes had incorrectly identified the aircraft and violated Iranian airspace during the operation. Iran called the incident a deliberate act of aggression, while the United States maintained it was a tragic error made during combat conditions. In 1986, the United States and Iran reached a settlement at the International Court of Justice. The U.S. expressed deep regret for the incident and the loss of life, but did not admit legal responsibility or formally apologize. As part of the agreement, the U.S. paid $61.8 million in compensation to the families of the victims on an ex gratia basis, approximately $213,000 per passenger. The downing of Iran Air Flight 655 remains one of the most controversial incidents in aviation and military history. Coming up at number 3, Japan Airlines Flight 123. Japan Airlines Flight 123 was a domestic passenger flight from Tokyo to Osaka on 12 August 1985. The Boeing 747 SR-46 operating the flight crashed into Mount Takamagahara in Gunma Prefecture, Japan. It remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. 12 minutes after takeoff from Tokyo's Haneda Airport, at an altitude of 24,000 feet, the aircraft suffered a sudden decompression. The rear pressure bulkhead had failed, causing the tail section of the aircraft, including the vertical stabilizer, to separate. All 4 hydraulic systems, which controlled the aircraft's flight surfaces, were severed. This left the aircraft nearly impossible to control. The pilot struggled to keep the aircraft stable for over 30 minutes using only engine thrust. But the aircraft ultimately descended uncontrollably and crashed into a mountain ridge. Of the 524 people on board, 520 died. There were only 4 survivors, all seated near the rear of the aircraft. The investigation revealed that the rear pressure bulkhead had been improperly repaired following a tail strike incident 7 years earlier, in 1978. The repair did not comply with Boeing's design specifications, and the incorrect rivet configuration caused metal fatigue that eventually led to the failure. The bulkhead failure initiated a chain reaction that rendered the aircraft uncontrollable. The crash led to significant changes in maintenance procedures, oversight of repair work, and emergency response coordination in Japan. Japan Airlines took full responsibility. Senior executives resigned, and a maintenance supervisor involved in approving the faulty repair died by suicide shortly after the crash. The crash site was later designated a memorial, and annual pilgrimages are made to the mountain to remember the victims. At number 4, we have Air India Flight 182. Air India Flight 182 was a scheduled international flight from Montreal to Delhi, with a stopover in London. On 23 June 1985, the Boeing 747-200 and 37B aircraft operating this flight was destroyed by a bomb at an altitude of 31,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, south of the Irish coast. All 329 people on board were killed. At the time, it was the deadliest aviation disaster involving a bomb and remains the worst mass killing in Canadian history. The flight had departed from Toronto and stopped in Montreal to pick up additional passengers before continuing to London. A bomb hidden in checked luggage exploded in the forward cargo hold, causing the aircraft to break apart midair. The wreckage fell into the ocean, and recovery operations retrieved both debris and bodies from the water over the following weeks. The bombing was planned and executed by members of a Canadian-based Sikh separatist group seeking retaliation against the Indian government for the 1984 Operation Blue Star military action at the Golden Temple in Amritsar. A second bomb, intended for another Air India Flight 301, exploded prematurely at Tokyo's Narita Airport, killing 2 baggage handlers. The investigation revealed major lapses in Canadian airport security. The suitcase containing the bomb was checked in at Vancouver and transferred to Flight 182 without the passenger ever boarding. The bag was not screened properly, and warnings about a possible terrorist plot were not acted upon by authorities. In 1992, after a lengthy investigation, charges were brought against several suspects. Only one man, Inderjit Singh Rayat, was convicted for his role in assembling the bomb. The others were acquitted or never brought to trial due to lack of evidence. The Canadian government later held a public inquiry, which concluded in 2010. The inquiry found that the bombing was preventable and cited systemic failures by Canadian law enforcement and intelligence agencies. In response, Canada's aviation security laws were overhauled, including the implementation of mandatory bag passenger matching and improved cooperation between intelligence services. Memorials to the victims exist in Canada, Ireland, and India. June 23rd is recognized in Canada as a National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Terrorism. Coming up at number 5, Pan Am Flight 103. Pan Am Flight 103 was a scheduled transatlantic flight from Frankfurt to Detroit, with stopovers in London and New York. On December 21, 1988, the Boeing 747-121 operating this flight was destroyed by a bomb while cruising at 31,000 feet over Lockerbie, a town in southern Scotland. All 259 people on board were killed, along with 11 residents on the ground. The total death toll was 270. The aircraft, named Clipper Maid of the Seas, had just departed London Heathrow and was 38 minutes into its flight to New York when a bomb detonated in the forward cargo hold. The explosion caused the fuselage to break apart midair. The cockpit and forward section separated from the rest of the plane, and the wreckage fell across a wide area, with the main fuselage crashing directly into a residential part of Lockerbie. The investigation determined that the bomb had been concealed in a radio cassette player, placed inside a suitcase. The bag had originated in Malta, transferred to a feeder flight into Frankfurt, and then loaded onto Flight 103 in London. Without the passenger boarding the flight, the explosive used was Semtex, and forensic evidence pointed to the involvement of Libyan intelligence operatives. 2 Libyan nationals were indicted in 1991. 1. Abdelbasset al-Megrahi was convicted in 2001 by a Scottish court sitting in the Netherlands. The other was acquitted. Libya initially denied responsibility, but later, under international pressure and sanctions, accepted formal responsibility in 2003 and agreed to pay compensation to the victims' families. The Libyan government did not admit guilt, but stated the settlement was in the national interest. The bombing had major consequences for aviation security. It exposed gaps in baggage handling procedures and led to the global implementation of stricter baggage screening and the requirement for all checked bags to be matched to passengers. Intelligence sharing between countries was also improved. In the United States, the Aviation Security Improvement Act was passed. The attack also played a part in shaping U.S. foreign policy towards Libya and counter-terrorism efforts worldwide. The memorials to the victims of Flight 103 exist in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Malta. Syracuse University, which lost 35 students. An annual remembrance ceremony. In Lockerbie, a memorial garden honors both the victims in the air and those killed on the ground. At number 6, we have Turkish Airlines Flight 981. Turkish Airlines Flight 981 was a scheduled flight from Istanbul to London with a stopover in Paris. On the 3rd March 1974, the McDonnell Douglas DC-10 operating the flight crashed into the Ermenonville forest near Paris shortly after takeoff from Orly Airport. All 346 people on board were killed. The aircraft had departed Paris at 12:32 p.m. Just 9 minutes into the flight, the rear cargo door suddenly failed and blew out due to an improper latching mechanism, The resulting explosive decompression tore away part of the cabin floor, severed control cables, and left the pilots unable to control the aircraft. The plane began a rapid descent and crashed into the forest at nearly full speed. The cargo door design, which opened outward, relied on a series of latches and locking pins that had previously been identified as vulnerable. In 1972, a similar incident had occurred on an American Airlines DC-10, but the aircraft had survived, despite investigations and manufacturer advisories recommending design changes. Those changes were not fully implemented across all aircraft. In the case of Flight 981, the door was not properly latched. Ground crew who had limited English and were not adequately trained on the door's mechanism believed the door was secure. In fact, the locking mechanism had been forced shut and the internal safety latch had not engaged. The failure to correct the known flaw and ensure crew awareness was a key factor in the disaster. The investigation held both McDonnell Douglas and Turkish Airlines responsible, one for design shortcomings, the other for improper maintenance and crew training. The crash had far-reaching consequences. All DC-10 aircraft were grounded until modifications were made to the cargo doors. Regulatory bodies, including the FAA, tightened certification requirements, and the importance of fully addressing known design risks became a central focus in aircraft manufacturing and airline operations. A memorial now stands in the Ermenonville Forest, listing the names of all 346 victims. The crash remains one of the worst in French aviation history. Coming up at number 7, we have September 11th attacks. On the 11th of September 2001, 4 coordinated terrorist attacks were carried out by the Islamist extremist group Al-Qaeda against the United States. The attackers hijacked 4 commercial airliners and deliberately crashed them, resulting in the deadliest aviation-related incident in history. American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, both Boeing 767 aircraft departing from Boston, were flown into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. The impacts and resulting fires caused both towers to collapse within hours. American Airlines Flight 77, a Boeing 757 departing from Washington Dulles, was crashed into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. United Airlines Flight 93, also a 757, was headed toward Washington, D.C., but crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers attempted to regain control from the hijackers. In total, 2,977 people were killed, 246 aboard the 4 aircraft, 2,606 in the World Trade Center and surrounding area, and 125 at the Pentagon. All 19 hijackers also died in the attacks. The hijackers exploited weaknesses in airport and in-flight security. At the time, cockpit doors were not reinforced and small weapons like box cutters could pass through security screening. Air traffic controllers and military defense systems were not prepared to handle aircraft being used as suicide weapons. The attacks triggered widespread and lasting global consequences. In the United States, the Transportation Security Administration was created and airport security procedures were dramatically overhauled. Cockpit doors were reinforced and protocols for hijack response were redefined. Surveillance, passenger vetting, and international intelligence sharing increased significantly. The political impact was equally far-reaching. The U.S. launched military operations in Afghanistan in response to the Taliban harboring al-Qaeda. The attacks also influenced the Iraq War, expanded counterterrorism legislation, and altered U.S. foreign and domestic policy. Memorials have been established at each attack site. The National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York City honors the lives lost, alongside similar memorials at the Pentagon and in Shanksville. Annual remembrance events are held worldwide, and 9/11 remains a pivotal moment in modern history, representing both profound loss and the beginning of a new era in global security and aviation policy. And finally, we have the Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision. The Charkhi Dadri mid-air collision occurred on the 12th of November 1996 in the skies near the village of Charkhi Dadri in Haryana, India. It involved two commercial aircraft, the Saudi Arabian Airlines Boeing 747-100B departing from New Delhi to Tehran, and a Kazakhstan Airlines Aviation Il-76 arriving from Shymkent to New Delhi. All 349 people aboard both aircraft were killed, making it one of the deadliest mid-air collision in aviation history. The Saudi flight had just taken off and was climbing to its assigned altitude of 14,000 feet. At the same time, the Kazakh aircraft was descending into Delhi airspace and was instructed to maintain 15,000 feet. However, due to miscommunication and poor situational awareness in the cockpit, the Kazakh aircraft descended below its assigned altitude and entered the same flight level as the Saudi jet. The two aircraft collided mid-air. The tail of the Kazakh Il-76 struck the left wing of the Saudi 747, causing both aircraft to break apart and fall into open fields below. Unfortunately, there were no survivors. The investigation found that the Kazakh crew had limited proficiency in English and relied on a radio operator to interpret instructions from Indian air traffic control. The descent below the assigned altitude occurred due to misunderstanding those instructions. Additionally, India did not require aircraft to carry on-board traffic collision avoidance systems at the time. As a result of the crash, India mandated the use of TCAS on all commercial aircraft operating in its airspace. This technology gives pilots real-time warnings about other aircraft and issues commands to avoid collisions, regardless of ground control. The Charkhi Dadri collision highlighted the dangers of language barriers in aviation and emphasized the need for reliable onboard collision avoidance systems. It also led to renewed emphasis on standard phraseology and language training in international flight operations. This list is not exhaustive, and these disasters were not all the same. Some were caused by mistakes, others by neglect, a few by deliberate violence. But each one left behind more than wreckage. They changed how we fly, how we train, and how we respond. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.